What's up, guys? This is Alex from the Duran, and I'm here with Eric Kraus, financial analyst from Moscow. And today we're going to be talking about the U.S. weaponizing the financial system. So, Eric, we had the U.S. Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Sigal Mandelker, come out with a statement the other day on the effects of the Russian sanctions that the Treasury, that the U.S. government is putting on Russia. And I want you to I'm going to read the statement to you, and I want you to comment on it, and to tell our viewers if it really is having the severe effect that Mandelker is saying it is having on the Russian economy. So I'll read you the statement, and I want you to comment on it. The actions of the U.S. Treasury have had significant consequences for the financial interests of individuals and businesses that were affected, including the blocking of hundreds of millions of dollars of Russian assets in the United States. What do you make of her statement, Eric? Is it true or false? And go a little bit more into depth as to what she's saying here.
Well, as stated, it's basically true. The individuals sanctioned, Mr. Deripaska and Viktor Vekselberg, have been very severely inconvenienced in their business dealings because of these sanctions. I did not know about them having physical assets blocked, but certainly it becomes very difficult for them to do business with anyone. The European banks are, not just the American banks, but the European banks as well, are very much afraid of doing business with them because of the fear of secondary sanctions, and this can extend to Asia. So it is a weapon, and it's a serious weapon in that, I mean, you can imagine somebody is sort of sitting in his office in Moscow or in the Kremlin, and America has snipers who can sort of pick them off at will without any explanation or any justification for their actions. It's, as you know, it's become very difficult for them to use some of their military weaponry, so they have moved towards financial weaponry. And so, they have weaponized.
Right. They've weaponized the financial.
They've weaponized power. The dollar system.
Right. And so the strategy by going after guys like Deripaska, what do you make of that strategy? Because obviously they can't go after the government and Putin himself, because I guess their overall goal is some sort of, I don't want to say regime change, but for Putin to lose his popularity or to lose the support of the quote-unquote oligarchs.
That is probably true. And of course, they're scoring another own goal, since there is nothing which makes the Russian government more popular than the popular perception of aggression from abroad. There is possibly a misconception in Washington that, like in the 1990s, this is a government in and of the oligarchs, and that the oligarchs can push Putin around as they could Yeltsin. Now, obviously, this is no longer the case. And though they're very uncomfortable with this, there's not a great deal they can do about it. From the Russian standpoint, the only good news is that the roll-in of the sanctions has been gradual, giving Russia time to seek to create alternative pathways. But this is certainly not easy. It's a long and drawn-out process.
What are those alternative pathways? Because I was reading the other day that the Central Bank of Russia has ramped up the purchase of more and more gold. Is that one alternative pathways? Are there others?
Well, they are afraid of the Americans suddenly clamping sanctions upon them and freezing their foreign reserves. Russia has something like, from memory, about 460 billion in foreign reserves, which is actually considerably larger than their total sovereign debt. Yes, there was the fear that this could suddenly be frozen arbitrarily. So they're trying to move that money out of harm's way. What is ultimately necessary, of course, will be alternative channels and alternative financial institutions. This is easy to say. It's relatively difficult to implement. But what the Americans are doing, of course, is creating a sort of a coalition of countries which are now aware that any time they are not looked upon favorably in Washington, they can be targeted. This includes countries like Iran, like Turkey, certainly China. And China's the big one. China has the financial heft, has the financial weight to create such systems. And Russia is publicly looking to find ways to use a domestic payment system so that they cannot be frozen out of SWIFT, or that if they are frozen out of SWIFT, it does not create domestic havoc, as well as to move into sort of the Chinese financial system, which is not susceptible to sanctions.
Staying on SWIFT, there was a curious statement that came out last week, out of all people, from Germany, the German foreign minister.
Yeah.
And I'll read you the statement, and I want you to elaborate on this statement. It has to do with SWIFT and the European Union. And German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said, "It is indispensable that we strengthen European autonomy by creating payment channels that are independent of the United States, a European monetary fund, and an independent SWIFT system." What do you make of that statement? And is it connected to the weaponization of finance that the U.S. is now directing towards Russia, China, Iran, and these countries?
It very certainly is directed against that, and very specifically Iran. There was a long, tedious negotiating process which found which resulted in a deal for Iran, allowing them to resume financial dealings with the rest of the world in return for a wind down of the nuclear program. And the Americans arbitrarily decided to cancel that, much to the fury of the Europeans, who stand a lot to lose, who had started to invest quite heavily. For instance, in South Pars, Total, the French group, had taken a multi-billion-dollar share of that project, which has now been taken up by China. So they're not happy to have to sell out. The various French automobile manufacturers, Renault, Peugeot, etc., were all building out and are obliged to write off those investments. Now, the German statement was surprising, but you'll notice that 24 hours later, it was at least partially disowned by Mrs. Merkel, who remains very much Atlanticist. And I sort of suspect that for as long as she's in power, we cannot expect much that is very good coming out of Germany.
Do you think that Merkel, after the statement was made, she did meet with Putin in Berlin?
Yes.
Do you think that her and Putin discussed the weaponization of the UN's financial system, and perhaps Merkel may be weighing her options now?
I would be astonished if they hadn't discussed it. Mm-hmm. It's a major topic of discussion in financial circles right now. Merkel is very cautious, and she is very strongly Atlantiste, very strongly aligned with Washington, to the extent that people sometimes wonder, is she being blackmailed by somebody? They're always talking about Russian hacking, but in fact, as we all know, the NSA is listening in on this conversation right now, had hacked Mrs. Merkel's mobile phone, and undoubtedly continues to do so. But in any event, that is speculative. What is clear is that she is very much afraid to take a step away from Washington. Now, if the U.S. administration continues to weaponize finance and continues to ride roughshod off the interests of their so-called partners, at some point they are going to rear up on their hind legs and fight back. But this is going to be difficult, especially because, as the German finance minister correctly said, this would require unity of the Europeans. For the EU to vote anything substantial would require all 27, right. And you have countries like Poland, which are very much wedded to the past and to the alliance with Washington, whereas some of their neighbors, like Romania, or especially like the Czech Republic, would like to assert a more European and a more Eurasian policy. So it's difficult.
It's difficult. And to wrap things up, Eric, this is a broader question, but I want your take on it. Do you think it's, number one, do you think the U.S. would weaponize the SWIFT system? That's my first question. And number two, is it even possible to create a different system from SWIFT, a successful different system outside of SWIFT?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes, it is possible. It would probably be a euro-based system, and it's just a matter of replicating the technology. Whether this is going to be done and whether there is the political will to do so, at present there is not. It's an excellent idea, and I believe at some point it's going to be necessary. But you have to take a step back and understand how this came to be. At the end of the Second World War, the United States accounted for approximately 50%, half of all global GDP. There was the U.S. and the others. It's now something like 18%. Given the secular rise, not so much an American decline. America has continued to grow, but you've seen much faster growth in other places. I mean, in PPP, in real terms, China is now a larger economy. However, China has always been very inward-looking, and it is a long, slow, painful process for them to become globalized and to offer alternatives. Because at present, an alternative comprised of Russia, Turkey, and Iran really would not have much heft, would not have much size, would have not have the necessary size. So we're talking about a long and difficult process. And at the present time, basically, Russia has got to find survival mechanisms. I mean, the Americans are bragging about how much damage they've done, but actually Russia is continuing to grow. The numbers are about, let's say, 1.8 to 2% GDP growth. But GDP numbers are misleading. And if you look at the quality of growth, if you look at the changes in infrastructure and how people live in the growing middle classes, in the increasing agricultural sector, the increasing diversification away from steel and coal and oil, then Russia has made huge progress. And that progress is continuing. The absence of access to foreign capital is, as I said, a major inconvenience. And for a long time, the Russian stock market was badly neglected by the authorities. And only now are we seeing some real reform of corporate governance, companies paying very high dividends, to the extent that Russia now has the highest dividend yield, I believe, of any stock market on earth. So at some point, it should become a means for raising domestic capital. Fortunately, at present, Russia has a very large current account surplus. It has a very modest budget deficit. So it isn't in need. It isn't in the situation of Turkey, which desperately has to borrow from abroad. Russia has been very conservative in financial management and can survive on their own resources.
Right. And real quick, do you think the U.S. would actually weaponize the SWIFT system? Would they actually do something like kick Russia out, or I don't know how it works?
I think it is extremely difficult. And for them, in the same way that to ban purchase of Russian sovereign debt is, first of all, a declaration of war, not shooting war, of course, but of diplomatic and financial war. And secondly, it's going to scare everybody else. People are going to say, well, they did it to Russia today. They can do it to us tomorrow. So this is going to accelerate a process which was going to happen anyway, which is a multipolar, as we now have a multipolar diplomatic system, there is going to be a multipolar financial system. And they can reap short-term benefit by abusing the sanctions. If they abuse them for long enough, they will lose the edge. And there will come a time when the United States, American companies, become victims of their own sanctioning.
Right. Interesting. Eric Kraus, financial analyst via Moscow. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop. Support the Duran, buy a t-shirt. Until next time, take care.